To call the meeting, the Capital Program Oversight Committee meeting to order. First item, we have, Don, do we have any public speakers?
We have two public speakers, Jason Panero and David Feliciano. Jason first.
Good afternoon, Joe and Ronnie. It's a day that we could really celebrate. And this time, I want to give a big thank you to Janon Lieber. And why Janon Lieber? Because he has given us two surprises within 2 weeks with the reopening of WTC Cortland, that I was there, and that station is beautiful. And the second one is the double track project that benefits those who use Long Island Railroad and Long Island. So, Jano, good job, and you're surprising us. Trust me. And I hope that you will surprise us even more with Phase 2 of 2nd Avenue Subway and the other projects that are in CPOC's territory. So keep doing your job. You're doing the best job ever possible. And Joe and Ronnie, let's keep doing the perfect job, shall we? That's all I have to say for this month.
Thank you. Next speaker is David Feliciano.
Wow. Hey, good morning. Is it on? All right. Afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. Boy, thank God. Thank God I just get off that WTC Cortland station. And by the way, I wouldn't think that station's been 17 years since I haven't used that since I was so young. And, now I just get off here. Now this is my route. By the way, thank you guys so much, and it's so great to see you, I'm a big fan of public transportation system. Fan. I grew up watching Thomas and Friends, but hey, by the way, thank you. I'm from the Bronx. My name's David. I want to tell you about the project, second base of 2nd Avenue Subway. Well, I want to say, the project is still going to be reviewed, and I'm glad to see, the lines is getting, the first phase, and now ready for the second phase to come up very soon. So as you know, the redesign of the bus network for the Bronx, we're going to be telling it, say, give a better service for local and express bus, and I'm really serious about I'm looking ahead for. And also, I want to tell about, the Penn Station access to all the way from Penn Station to all the way to parts of Hudson Valley, which is I really don't serve because I really serve the Harlem line to Melrose Station to get off on my block, like a few blocks away. And I usually go in like a couple way blocks to 167th Street, B and D line station. Everyone,
Please conclude your remarks.
I want to thank you guys so much. My days of time's up, and good to play you guys, board members, chairman, Hakem. Nice to meet you guys all. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now the approval of the minutes from our meeting on July 23rd. I'll move the minutes. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have to wait till the speakers finish.
There being none, I'll look for a second. Seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? They carry. Don, do we have any changes to the committee work plan?
There's one change in the work plan because of the diversity committee will be moving to October rather than this month as originally scheduled. The updates on the small business development program and the MWBE participation have also been moved to October to coincide with that.
Okay. Thank you. Now on to the quarterly MTA Capital Construction Company update. Do we lead off directly with Cortlandt Street, or do you have any comments beforehand? Cortland, go ahead. Don?
Okay, good afternoon.
Dan?
So I'm very pleased to report that we've achieved revenue service on September 8th of this month. At the last CPOC meeting, in June, we had stated that we were working towards an October completion date of revenue service. So with the help of New York City Transit and our team, we were able to focus our efforts and complete this station open to the public by September 8th. I'd like to highlight the incredible teamwork necessary to get the station open in September. New York City Transit went above and beyond to help us resolve all major issues. I would especially like to thank my staff for an incredible job well done in pushing this job to completion. Without the incredibly talented people on my staff and New York City Transit staff, this opening would not have been achieved. So, let's see if I can get another one. I need one more. There we go. So, although we were able to overcome the major risks to opening the station presented in the last CPOC meeting, thank you. The focus now shifts to completing the remaining work in an active station utilized by our customers. Besides punchless work, the work remaining primarily consists of work at the north entrance, replacement of some temporary finishes, and completion of the artwork. We're discussing work schedules and contractor methods for completing this work to minimize the impact to subway riders. Right now, why is that going the wrong way? Sorry. So I'll just play a short 2.5-minute video for anyone that hasn't seen the station yet. As you can see, we'll start at our main entrance, which is through the World Trade Center Oculus to the northbound platform. There is also another entrance on the northbound platform to the south, which enters into Tower 3 of the World Trade Center. We have a new customer service booth that we passed and fare arrays, security cameras, granite floors, and metal ceilings. Countdown clocks and customer information signs are provided for passenger convenience. We're now going down to the north mezzanine with our escalator on the left and art wall on the right. There are 3 elevators in the station, 2 at the north mezzanine, which we're getting into right now, 1 directly ahead of us that goes to the northbound platform, and 1 as it turns left ahead of you there that goes to the southbound platform. We have out front signage and advertising for customer information and help point intercoms and on-the-go displays. As we go up the stairs to the north, from the north mezzanine to the southbound platform, there is a north entrance with an ADA elevator to the street directly in front of us. The station is fully ADA compliant. The station is equipped with wireless service as well as emergency signal for fire department and NYPD. As we move up a little bit to the north, you'll notice that the columns have been removed at the center line of the track. This provides an open atmosphere that we'll be able to see directly from one platform to the other and into the World Trade Center Oculus structure. The walls are white marble, and the artwork is at the centers of each platform, designed by Ann Hamilton, displaying the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the 1948 UN Declaration of Human Rights. It was commissioned by Arts for Transit. It's titled Chorus and spans a total of 4,350 square feet across both platforms. So this stairwell that we're coming up to shortly goes to the south mezzanine, which also has an entrance down to the World Trade Center Oculus on either side of the PATH terminal. So we'll have direct access to not only our stations at Fulton Center, but we'll also have direct access to PATH terminals, PATH access, to PATH station access, and to the ferry service over at the World Financial Center. This is our final entrance, which is at the south end of the southbound platform and discharges out to the World Trade Center site just next to the south reflection pool of the memorial. And that concludes the presentation and concludes my report.
Dan, thank you very much.
I just wanted to add one thing, a point I made in the committee meeting earlier, which is so I was surprised to find that the opening on September 8th was actually barely a week after the original projected date in 2015. And I just thought that, at a time when obviously our major capital projects are understandably taking some heat for schedule and budget performance, that the fact that in the end we were able to deliver very, very close to the original schedule was something that we should all be proud of. And I also want to recognize Dan Creighton, who managed this project through thick and thin, came over from the FTA Lower Manhattan rebuilding team to take it over and really did a fabulous job.
You did. Dan, thank you very, very much. Are there any questions or comments from the committee members? There being none, Diane, do we have an IC?
Just congratulations to all for this.
And the air conditioning in there is quite unique.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the committee. I know it's late, but I want to take a moment to congratulate Dan and the project team on opening the station 1 month earlier than previous forecasts. I'd also like to acknowledge the tremendous work, cooperation, and dedication it took by the project team, MTA Capital Construction, and New York City Transit to achieve this goal. And that concludes my comments.
Okay, great. Now on to East Side Access, Jano and Bill.
Sure, I'm going to start it off, and Bill will jump in about halfway through. So this is meant to be, we have not reported to this committee in a few months, so we're going to try to get into the substance of the work, but also how we're implementing the management initiatives, which I outlined for you some months ago, and monitoring our performance. Back in, I believe it was April, we talked about major management initiatives, including resolving open change orders, the backlog that was bedeviling this project, creating a team which was the so-called PMO, the Project Management Organization, which, all right, a PMO which was designed to help us prioritize among the 43,000 activities in the schedule to make sure that we were not just getting the individual components of the project done, but when you have to choose prioritization, that you're making the right choices to maintain the schedule. And implementing incremental systems testing. Recall that we made a decision after a lot of study that because there are 29 separate systems with so many different intersection points, and there was, in my view and in the view of some of the experts, risk in just trying to get them all done and then hoping that when you turned it all on that you wouldn't spend a year or two trying to figure out where the bugs were, that we would do it incrementally in phases and in sections. So those are the three major initiatives that I undertook. The change management group has been established. We did that, and the results, I think, are significant, although I'm by no means satisfied. We've knocked down the backlog of change orders and open issues by about 40% in the 4 months since I outlined the situation for you. So that's good progress. It also is low-hanging fruit, and there are more, and the issues that remain are more challenging. So I'm not certain we're going to maintain equal pace, but we have to get those issues behind us. So-called PMO integrator, this is the schedule prioritization operation that will manipulate that huge schedule that we now have, which is a great tool but needs to be used to prioritize. We've created a group. We'll talk again about the leadership transition that we're undergoing with Bill's retirement, but obviously we've created a group that is solely devoted to this prioritization effort. It sounds run-of-the-mill, but let me tell you, when you're dealing with something of this complexity, determining in our so-called heat map, that's it, which issues are the ones that you need to focus on most urgently is a difference maker. And that's what we're doing, and I think we're doing it pretty effectively. As you heard from me months ago, and again today, rather than doing whole systems and then turning them on and hoping everything works together, we're breaking it down into phases that are geographic. Let me just emphasize that they're not all sequential. So not all of phase one is, phase two is waiting for phase one and so on. Some of it can be done out of sequence, but they are packages of activities that need to be undertaken in a coherent group. And we are actually tracking them and making progress to maintain, again, the purpose is to maintain that 2022 revenue service date. And we are making progress in a way that preserves that, at least to this point, and I'm satisfied with the progress we're making. I'm not going to use time today to talk about it, but we have developed a whole new dashboard of so-called KPIs, which we have not spent time with our friends at the IEC on. So I think we need to give them a couple months to absorb it and critique it and dialogue with us. But I just wanted you to know that we are being aggressive about, monitoring our own performance with what I think is a more effective group of performance indicators. One KPI that we talked a lot about is Amtrak. I told you back in April that I was deeply concerned about Amtrak's lack of inability to support our work in keeping with the schedules which had been continuously provided to them. There has been an uptick in their performance, but it is somewhat inconsistent and it's still a bit of a struggle. So I want to credit Amtrak for responding when we raised the profile of this issue and brought home to them how urgent it was. But we are continuing, frankly, to have some difficulty getting all the work done in Harold. But as I think we showed the board this morning and in the Long Island Railroad Committee, we're getting a heck of a lot of work done in Harold. And I would say that the team is not letting this one issue prevent them from maintaining really serious progress in Harold. Bill, construction progress.
Thank you, Jana. We've reached some significant milestones in Harold interlocking, which are not only required for December 2022 revenue service, but have immediate benefits for Long Island Railroad and its customers today as they're put into effect. For example, as we've talked earlier, the completion of the CIL signal hut cutovers and placing those into service, along with the newly aligned Mainline 4 track, increases both operational reliability and flexibility. In addition, we've got 3 mainline track realignments that have replaced aging wooden ties with new concrete ties, and the installation of 9 new high-speed switches, 6 of which were replacements for old switches. They also provide infrastructure with much-needed improvements. Lastly, since April, we've actually conducted 35 site tours for members of the press, members of the Long Island business community, elected officials, real estate professionals, and other stakeholders in the project. Our commitment is to keep our stakeholders informed and current, as well as future customers updated on our progress, and remind them of the importance of ESA to Long Island and to the region. Many more tours are already scheduled for the coming months. As work continues in the field, we're also awarding our last major contracts needed for revenue service. The last systems contract, which is a tunnel signal installation, was awarded last week on Friday, September 21st. And we've also received bids on our last civil contract, which is the BC Tunnel Approach. We received those bids in August, and that's in procurement. As a lesson learned from 2nd Avenue Subway, as well as other recently completed projects, we are closely tracking the installation, testing, and energization of power systems, as well as the other systems. As you can see, our progress to date since April is in close alignment with our April 2018 replan. Looking ahead, we expect to reach these major milestones shown here in Manhattan Systems and Harold by the end of the year. These graphs show how we are doing compared to the April estimate at completion forecast of $11.1 billion. The actuals to date, as you'll note, are in line with our forecasted spend rate. In terms of Cost contingency, our current contingency is lower than our April 2018 forecast, but that's primarily due to an increased execution of our anticipated contract change orders, as Jano discussed earlier in the presentation. Go back to the schedule. We're currently maintaining the 10 months of program contingency that we also reported on in April. There are many risks that we monitor and mitigate. The next 5 slides are the top current risks. Shown here is a potential delay in the delivery of our final traction power substation. That's being mitigated by closely monitoring equipment fabrication and testing and making sure the rooms that they'll be installed in are ready at the time of delivery for installation. Second, we have been working diligently with our project-wide systems contractor, Tutor Perini Corporation, to have a mutual agreement on the new incremental integrated systems testing schedule by the end of this month. We then will be negotiating cost impacts of this new schedule, and we'll present those to the board in the coming months. Third, we need to execute 3 contract modifications that are critical to the start of IST. One modification, the fiber optic network changes, is being presented to the board for approval this month, and the other 2 will be presented in October. In Herald, we have 1 remaining outage, which is needed to perform track work in advance of the Tunnel BC approach construction. This proposed outage is being reviewed now with both Amtrak and Long Island Railroad, since this outage will result in service changes to both railroads during that period. We are expecting to get approval for the outage early next year in January. Finally, we continue to work with Amtrak to get the level of support required to meet the schedule. As shown earlier, we are getting sufficient levels of access and protection support to enable our third-party contractors to complete their work. However, the direct work that Amtrak performs, that support remains critical and has improved, but is still less than what we need. As mentioned previously, we are working with Amtrak on a design-build contract that the MTA plans to let to a third-party contractor to engage qualified ET personnel to perform catenary and other related ET work on Amtrak systems in Herald. That's under discussion.
Recall, we would have paid for it if Amtrak was doing it also under, for better or worse, the existing agreements. So what we've done is we are redesigning work which costs money, and we're paying a private sector contractor rather than Amtrak, which may cost a little more money. But we are in the process mitigating the risk of continued Amtrak inability to staff their own work.
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Is that aimed at having a beneficial impact on our schedule,
It is.
but not so beneficial on our budget?
That's correct.
Okay.
Finally, since we last reported to the committee in April, I believe we have effectively put into place the management initiatives, and we are now achieving the intended results. Although there are and will continue to be challenges to overcome, significant construction progress continues, and the momentum of the project is building towards achieving our December 2022 revenue service date. As this will be my final presentation to the committee, I would like to express my appreciation to the committee and to the MTA for the opportunity to lead such a vital and transformative project for the region in New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And Bill, let me be the first of many, I think, to congratulate you on your retirement. look forward to that opportunity someday myself. Uh, But thank you very much for all of your service, and I look forward to seeing you in December 2022 with the ribbon cutting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Bill or Jano on the project? There being none, let's move forward with the IEC report. And Darlene.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The IEC review can be found on page 39 of your CPOC books. The IEC would like to recognize the successful completion of major track reconfiguration and switch installation work in Harold, including the CIL cutovers, which required significant support from Long Island Railroad. The IEC acknowledges several improvements in key areas. With the addition of the Program Management Office Integrator and the Change Management Group, the project has been able to strengthen its organizational structure to prioritize the work as it shifts from systems. The contract modification process has shown a reduction in the number of backlog change orders and the time required to execute the modifications. Additional resources may be needed to further reduce this duration and to resolve the remaining contract issues. As recommended by the IEC in April, the project is in the process of developing key performance indicators that will provide the tools necessary to track the progress moving forward. The IEC concurs with the major risks as characterized by the project team. The project will need to mitigate these risks, including the availability of sufficient resources and any other underlying project issues. As the project continues its transition to incremental IST, the IEC notes that the incorporation of the incremental system testing approach into the contractor's schedules is vital to effectively progress the work to completion. This concludes the IEC report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the independent engineer? Yes, Commissioner Ferrer.
Just to put a final punctuation at the end of my question of Mr. Goodrich before, with respect to the catenary work. I don't mean to state the obvious, but Long Island Railroad doesn't use catenary, right? So this is for Amtrak, right?
That's correct.
Gotcha.
But as Jano pointed out, the project's been at risk for the 4.5 years I've been on it, with the availability of Amtrak resources to perform that work. So, in order to mitigate that risk positively going forward, we felt as though the best mitigation, and this is the first time we've got Amtrak management to support this, is to consider design build where we would engage qualified ET personnel, only we do it through our own third-party contract. And they'll monitor the work, they'll have to accept the work, they'll provide access and protection for it. The key is they really need to provide the access and protection so we can mitigate any potential risk there.
And this catenary work was that which Amtrak required of us to use this to get East Side access.
But it's not just separate work for the benefit of Amtrak. As we go into the interlocking and we need to relocate tracks that have catenary overhead because Amtrak operates on those tracks, as soon as we touch those tracks, having to relocate them, like any other infrastructure you touch, once you modify it, you need to basically restore it to the current standards.
We're building a new catenary.
Correct.
Okay.
Of which, when the New Haven line comes into Penn Station, Metro North will be able to take advantage of, correct? Because they use catenary.
We hope.
We hope.
We should all live that long.
Now on to Second Avenue Subway Phase 2. Tim?
Thank you. I'll get right into it. For the environmental NEPA process, we made public and published the environmental assessment back in July for public comments. We went out to multiple stakeholders and communities to solicit comments, and even though the formal comment period ended in August, we still continue to go out and we still continue to collect comments, and we expect to incorporate those comments into the document as long as we possibly can as we await for the FTA's finding. We had over 30 sets of comments, which was as expected. We submitted a draft response to the FTA in September, and we believe we're on track to get the FTA finding shortly, sometime this quarter. For our federal New Starts funding application, I'd like to pause and explain two recent changes that the FTA made to their risk assessment process. First is the FTA is requiring that they run a formal risk assessment earlier in the process than previously. So the project is at project development right now at around the 30% state of design. The FTA is requiring the risk assessment be run now before we get into final engineering. And they're also requiring that the price certainty threshold increases from a 50% to a 65% threshold. What this could mean is that performing those two activities at the project at the state that it is now could potentially increase the project contingency that we have to maintain. This is a change that the FTA has made across the country. It's not focused just on us. It's focused on small projects as well as large projects. Even with that change, we're still encouraged that we can meet our FFGA goal by the end of 2020. And the FTA is encouraging us to submit all documents required to enter into engineering and to complete project development by the end of this year. Regarding our design process, we're on schedule to complete our preliminary design this quarter or shortly thereafter. We're working to address and incorporate over 2,000 comments that we've received on the draft preliminary documents, and we're currently now going through page turn reviews of those preliminary documents. We're also completing the design build packages for the structural shell contracts and the TBM tunneling contracts. And we're continuing to develop the design of the advanced works package, where we're incorporating information that we're gathering from our extensive site investigation program that we have ongoing now. Overall, our goals are to be ready to go full throttle as soon as we receive FTA approval, and of course, to continue to incorporate lessons learned, spur innovation using design build, and to incorporate some of the key indicators or performance indicators that are being developed on the other projects, Eastside Access as one example, for all the work moving forward, and to apply lessons learned, of course.
May I interrupt for just a second? I mean, this is the moment when we have, with all the response to the comments and where we are in design, this is the moment when we can bring home to bear some of the ideas of cost containment that Scott talked to the board about and that Joe gave a speech at the Building Congress about, which is things like decustomization. Taking things that historically we have done with our very specific requirements and specs, and trying to do stuff that's more, use technology and systems and components that are more off the shelf. So now is the moment, and we have, I've had this conversation with Andy Byford, but really is the moment that we need to figure out how do we do things differently than the past? How do we make this a project that is easier and cheaper to build than Second Avenue Phase 1, for example? And I'll be reporting back to you on how that discussion is going, but I'm going to be working closely with Transit As I said, as Tim said, we're right now in the thick of it.
Our outreach effort continues to be effective, and the visitors at the CIC continue to grow. We're up actually now over 5,400 visitors to the CIC. It's clear that there's a genuine enthusiasm for this project in the community. That concludes my report.
Yes.
I have perhaps a general and somewhat maybe abstract question, but we all know we're facing a huge capital crisis of just for fast forward, perhaps $40 billion or more, in addition to our regular ongoing capital programs. And, at what point, and this is maybe to you, Mr. Chairman, do we have to make some serious choices between project expansion, like Phase 2 of the Second Avenue Subway and other capital projects, and the savior of the existing system and bringing the current system up to a state of good repair? And to what extent, and I don't really understand the trade-offs, the trade-offs between to what extent capital funds can be reallocated. And is this an item that is really on the table as we go into the beginning of our discussions about the next capital plan?
Yes, it is on the table. As we go into the discussions this December, the 20-year capital needs will come out, and then that begins the process in which we will also be working with the legislature on various different forms of new revenue, as well as beginning the process with the Capital Program Review Board, which will be completed probably in the fall, if not definitely before the end of...
This fall?
No, next fall.
Next fall.
Next 19, a year from now.
That's bad.
Right, it was only 2 days into this fall, I think.
Right.
But nonetheless, next fall, if not by the end of the year. I've seen it go over the year, but it's generally sometime in the fall, early winter.
And I raise this in an environment where even if you put all of the proposed new funding sources that have been proposed together, it's not clear that we have enough money, and as well as concerns about fare increase and fare erosion. And I guess I raise this question now with respect to this capital project, but perhaps others as well, that there does reach a point of inevitability when we, given the long tails on these projects, when we sort of say, well, we're so deeply into it, we really have to go forward, almost irrespective of other priorities. And I would like some assurance that we're not quite at that stage yet with this Phase 2 of the Second Avenue Subway.
The phase that we can't reverse ourselves. This started in 1937, 1938, long before we were born. I'm not sure, in the 20s, I'm sorry.
Well,
that's right, the first bond issue was issued for the 20s.
I realize that.
And so, the debate, which will be a robust debate about what projects are included and not included and what's funded and not funded, will begin. And I clearly know your point and your viewpoint. And we just, it's the beginning of a process.
Okay, and I'm not saying where I necessarily come out on all of this. I just think that we proceed, to listen. It's almost that we're proceeding with a degree of inevitability at this point that I'm not sure we should proceed quite that way. At least that's the tone I have.
There are numerous hurdles beyond our own capital. Just trying to get the federal government in its current construct to be a partner in this is going to be critical in a go, no-go situation. There are a lot of questions, but the people who live in Upper Manhattan have been requesting this for quite some period of time. And I think it's worth it to continue this process until we find out that we can or can't do it. But it's going to come down to prioritization.
And I certainly recognize this is an important New York City project, and well recognize the advantages of this project. I just think it has to be weighed in light of all the other challenges we face.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue for next year is going to be, if I can categorize it in one word, it'll be prioritization.
Thank you.
Thank you. Neil?
First, I'll just comment on my colleague's comment, which is I thank you for saying that, Carl. I think those are really important points to make because every project should be considered for its need, and we've had many discussions here about what we can afford. I've often said that you don't add a wing to your house when the roof is leaking, and this is a new wing. That being said, that we're trying to put a lot of new wings on the house, and some, as we're going to get to in a moment, are very important, have already been approved, so it's important to go forward in those. Jano, I did one question for you. As you're thinking about the, what was the phrase you used, non-customization? I never heard of that term before.
Decustomization.
You mean standardization? Okay. As we look to standardize, I've noticed nounification. I've always found there's two ways of doing this, and they both are helpful and in parallel. One is the sort of bottom-up de novo approach, which you're talking about, which is go through each piece and figure out how do we do it as a standardized way as opposed to customized. There's a top-down approach, which is also useful, which is to say it cost us, because we have an example, it cost us X dollars per, pick a metric, per foot, per month, per station, whatever metric you want to use on the phase one. We can use that and then set a goal for ourselves that phase two will cost 20, 30, whatever % lower than phase one. Do we have a view as to what the target is that de-customization will yield us a certain range? And I'm not holding to a three-digit number yet, but I'm just trying to understand how you're thinking about that.
No, I don't have that goal. There are way too many variables. De-customization, pardon the term, is just one tool in the toolbox of how do you manage the program. And what we're really talking about is what's the program for this facility, right? And you know how complex it is and how much you have to trade off the different goals. So I think you're not wrong that we should set targets.
Also known as being right, right? The opposite of.
Okay. I will disagree with that. But
you're being quite Talmudic today.
Up to now, we've been trying to figure out just the basics of you know where do you put stuff and how to accomplish the structure. Remember, we have existing tunnels, and we're trying to figure out. One thing we are trying to figure out is how to optimize the usefulness of what's already been built. Even though standards have changed, become more customized, a lot in the last 40 years since those tunnels were built. So. It's a fair point, but we have not yet set that kind of target.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, I want to kind of like go to the other side of the equation. Is there any, I mean, you're obviously doing this for a reason, and one of the reasons is the people up there need a service. Adding the service up there drastically changes the land values up there. And I happen to be up in the barrio quite frequently. It occurs to me that you will have relatively more development up there in the second phase than you had down there on the first phase, because that was relatively more developed going into the project. But has there been a calculation as to how much land value has been increased along that right-of-way in phase one, and assuming then that the increase, the delta, will be bigger in phase two? Has there been any sort of calculation? I notice a lot of big buildings going up there.
I don't know if there's been a calculation. There's been an acknowledgement that the reality that the subway was coming had did over time have an impact on the appeal of the neighborhood for development. What that increment was, I don't know that we've nailed it exactly down, but it's a big number because the land values have drastically increased. The question of whether there's the potential for capturing any of that, any value for the second phase of Second Avenue or indeed for any other projects is a political question that I think you know has been chewed on by the various levels of government for a while. It's obviously there, and the rest of the country is using land value growth and incremental taxes as a tool to finance projects. It'll be up to our leadership and all the levels of government to decide whether we're going to apply it in New York.
Any further questions, comments? There being none, the IEC report. Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 points I'd just like to highlight for this afternoon. First of all, from our observations, the program continues to track well toward its twin goals for 2018, the completion of the project development documents and the environmental assessment process. I think as part of that process, we want to also point out that the project's team's heavy engagement with New York City Transit on ideas and lessons learned from Phase 1 is commendatory at this stage. I feel it should lead to some streamlining of transit's coordination with the process down the road. And that being my 2 points, I'll conclude.
Any questions? Then we're ready to go to Penn Access.
Thank you and good afternoon. First, I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of our recent activities and then take a closer look at some of our accomplishments. The planning work on Penn Access is moving forward, and specific activities that have been completed during the third quarter include the following. We've done a submission of a draft environmental assessment document to Amtrak, and we've also have a CMAQ application submission underway. We have participated in a city-led station access planning process, and the general engineering consultant contract has also been negotiated. That said, you'll notice we have a red X here. We have a major challenge that's facing us, and that is the owner of the right-of-way of Penn Access of the Hellgate line, which is, of course, Amtrak. In order to really move the project ahead successfully, we need confirmation from Amtrak that Metro-North can, in fact, run its service along the Hellgate line. And these discussions are being had at the very high levels within the MTA. So to talk more specifically about different categories, we are progressing funding and environmental planning activities. We submitted an application in August for CMAQ funding. CMAQ is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, and our project is actually very well positioned for this funding opportunity. Our project will reduce vehicle miles that have been traveled, and it's really a perfect candidate. We expect to have a determination as to whether or not we're eligible for the CMAQ funds in mid-2019. In addition, the environmental assessment is under development. Draft chapters have been submitted to Amtrak for their review. That's partially in cooperation with some of the requests that they have made to us to see the document at the early stages. We will then be submitting this to the FTA at the end of the year. We are, however, at this time hearing that there's an FTA backlog, and this has to do with a number of the actions that are active. And so it may it may extend the review times, which could push out the Penn Access FONSI, the finding of no significant impact. The FONSI is now expected to be complete in mid-2019 rather than at the end of 2018. We would like to note that this does not impact the critical path. In addition to the environmental work, we've also been working very successfully with local stakeholders. During the past quarter, we have worked with the city stakeholders to discuss the 4 stations and how they might be integrated into the East Bronx communities. Under the Department of City Planning's initiative, a meeting was convened in August with the New York City Department of Transportation, EDC, the Bronx Borough President's Office, as well as MTA to discuss station area planning. And then based upon this meeting, City Planning will now focus on developing some very site-specific strategies that are going to look to enhance the streetscape around the stations and the connectivity to these 4 stations. As mentioned earlier, there are several key issues that are impacting the progress of this project, and they center around Amtrak cooperation and commitment to allow Metro North to operate along the Hellgate line. Without this Amtrak partnership and cooperation, we are at this time unable to advance the engineering work. When we last met with you, we talked about in June the fact that we were reviewing the GEC cost proposals. We have now fully negotiated the contract with the GEC, and actually we're ready to present that to the Metro North Committee as well as to the MTA Board. As soon as we get a confirmation from Amtrak on their partnership, we will be able to proceed with this very important next step. So we're continuing to move the project ahead. Our goals in the next quarter include the following. We will be submitting the draft environmental assessment to the FTA. We're going to complete New Haven line simulations, which informs the station, service station planning. We're also assuming the Amtrak partnership. We will execute the memorandum of understanding, which will allow us to activate the preliminary design. We will also be presenting track alignments to the freight operator, CSX, to get their concurrence on the proposed alliance, the alignment. And this concludes my presentation.
Are there any questions or comments? Please.
From a previous report that we've heard on Penn Station access, there was discussion of MTA working with Amtrak to plot out the alignment of the 4 new Bronx stations. Doesn't that sort of lead one to believe that Amtrak will allow us to use the Hellgate Bridge?
Well, the Hellgate Bridge, the Hellgate line, clearly we are moving ahead with Amtrak on an engineering level. We have been conducting simulations to determine whether or not the track alignments will be a 3-track alignment or a 4-track alignment. I believe we talked a little bit about this last time. That being said, that is moving ahead. However, we still need more conclusive confirmation from Amtrak that, in fact, that explicit confirmation that they're going to allow us to operate on the Hellgate line.
More specifically, it makes no sense for us to kick off the design process until we know that Amtrak is going to agree to be a partner and let us to build this facility and share it over time. Otherwise, I have to bring you a design contract of what, $20+ million? 32 $32 million. Ask you to authorize it, start the clock on that money, that expenditure, before we have a commitment from Amtrak. I wasn't willing to do that.
And haven't we also talked with Amtrak about the use of shell interlocking?
My friends at Metro North will tell you that they've talked to Amtrak for 100 years about shell interlocking, every day, all day.
It's just west of New Rochelle.
West of New Rochelle.
It's where the
But
Grand Central
that's
and Penn Station line
that's
split.
been a constant dialogue about where it is, and it's really not this group's responsibility, but that is a constant dialogue between MNR and Amtrak.
And Jenna, if you like, Mike Schiffer is here from Metro North.
Sure. Oh yeah, Mike.
Mike Schiffer, Vice President for Planning at Metro North. With respect to the concerns about shell interlocking, one of the things that we have done over the recent months has been to simulate a kind of a worst case scenario in terms of, or best case scenario from the perspective of the customer, of number of trains running through the Hellgate line as well as on the New Haven line overall. And those simulations demonstrated that shell interlocking was not, in fact, a problematic area. We did have tie-ups in the simulations at places just east of Harrison, New York, as well as at Stamford. And we've worked through that by adjusting the schedules and adjusting the number of trains. So our simulations have demonstrated, they're kind of stress testing, if you will, the New Haven line to make sure that this overlay would not cause a problem. And in fact, getting back to shell, what it demonstrated is that Shell in its current configuration could handle Penn Station access service.
When we last discussed this, I think you may have been the person who said all trains destined for the Hellgate line would be on the southern two tracks of the main line, so that they use that island platform on the south side of New Rochelle. That being the case, where would New Haven line trains that were running local, for instance, between Stamford and New Rochelle, have to switch to get to those tracks? How much east of New Rochelle?
You mean in terms of, I'm sorry.
Right now, all of the local trains are headed for Grand Central, obviously.
Right.
And they can be on the northern side of New Rochelle
Correct.
Station. But ones destined for the Hellgate line have to be on the south side of New
Correct.
Rochelle Station. Where
Yes.
would they have to switch to get to those two tracks?
There's an interlocking just before you reach New Rochelle
East of New
Station.
Rochelle.
There's one east and
Okay.
one west, and they cross over. In fact, Amtrak currently follows that pattern now with their service to and from Boston. They cross over to the south side, while
Right.
our services
East
that are
of
going
New
to
Rochelle, obviously.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. Whereas our services continue on the other side of the plant.
Is there anyone else? And I have a few. What is that term that that Amtrak uses? It's a euphemism for giving them a lot of money for projects of their own choosing, which has nothing to do with our own. What is that term? No, the one that they use. Local investments.
Regional investments.
Regional investments,
yeah.
yes. They call these things regional investments. In the list of things that seem to be at issue in executing this MOU, is not one of the regional investments that they proposed the total replacement of the Pelham Bay Bridge?
That's correct.
What do you figure the cost of that would be?
In the 400 to 600 million range.
Okay. And that's the bridge that they use all the time, and they had, and it's never appeared before in their list of needs that they would seek funding for, but now that we're close enough, and our back pocket is close enough, somebody ought to report them to Chief Delatorre. So they would like us to pick up $600 million for the replacement of that bridge. Wrong?
We're not right now. It's not the entire amount, but it's in our view, Mr. Chairman, is well in excess for us to pay the lion's share of a bridge, which is Amtrak's, and they've been using, or their predecessors have been using for 100 years, and needs to be replaced in somewhere between 10 and 20 years. Seems like a cost shift that's not entirely equitable.
That's another euphemism, but okay. Since we're all talking about these things. So they would like to also, as I understand it, charge us for using that entire right-of-way in excess of fees that we pay in the usual course of events for other things. Using right-of-way, for example, in pieces of LIRR and Metro North. What does that cost?
So this is a big hot button in the MOU negotiation. We have made a lot of progress. We are probably 5 months behind where we ought to be. We would have been able to bring to the committee, to the board, the design contract and get the project going in May. But we haven't been able to because of the Amtrak business. We have resolved a lot of issues. The issue you just mentioned, which they call access fees, is one of the principal sticking points. Amtrak has conveyed that they intend to charge us what they call access fees, which is a fee beyond, for use of the right-of-way, for use of the real estate, call it what you will, beyond what's specified in PREA, in the federal legislation about cost sharing between Amtrak and commuter railroads. They don't share, they don't, as far as we know, they're not getting it from Long Island Railroad, Metro North, New Jersey Transit, any of the major operators up and down the Northeast Corridor. So we have taken the position that that's not a reasonable ask, and that has been a sticking point.
So they would like to charge, let me be very specific about this, not us, charge our riders, wherever they ride, on a bridge, a tunnel, Long Island Railroad. They would like to charge them for the use of this over and above what they charge.
Correct.
Because they can?
That's what they seem, that seems to be their position. Yep.
Is there anything else that they will be asking us to pay for the privilege of waving by them and putting more service on those tracks and on that right of way than they ever have?
Well, it's very similar to the dialogue we just had. At, you just instigated about East Side Access. We are going to pay for the entire project. We have to pay for the entire project, and it's subject to Amtrak's design approvals. So they will get all kinds of new infrastructure out of this, but they also want to charge us these other fees, and you fasten on a couple of them. But they'll be getting a fully rebuilt railroad as a result of this at our taxpayers' cost.
Are there any more fees that they would like to gift us with?
I think those are the big ones. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the reason why we have obviously a delay in an agreement on moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Brown and then Mr. Albert.
Yeah, Freddie, I thought it was too late in the afternoon for cynicism, but like Lily Tomlin said, no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. So I was going to ask really, and it was only halfway satirical question, was that is this the same Amtrak that we were going to sue last spring, or is this a different Amtrak? Obviously, it's the same Amtrak. I know the answer to my question. You have a very complicated relationship with Amtrak, but I suggest that, of course, they're going to try to get the most leverage they can out of every deal they do with you, and you're going to try to get the most leverage they can out of every deal you do with them. Depending on who has got whose arm behind whose back at which particular time. However, as the federal government continues to force Amtrak to drive more and more, suck more of its financing out of the Northeast Corridor, more and more pressure will be placed on your relationship. And that's before you get to the issue of Gateway, which confounds this whole discussion. It's a very complicated relationship. I mean, I look at the contracts I negotiate, and they're so ridiculously simple compared to the layers of intricacy in this sort of deal. And, it really gets to the point where you turn around and say, well, they don't have really, everything they do has to be controlled with or negotiated with the whole federal government. So you're really put, it's hard to make these plans that are New York specific things. And I want you to extract more from the real estate industry to pay for it. But then if the federal government sees you doing that, they'll have the real estate industry here paying for Gateway and paying for the tunnel in Baltimore. And it's really, this very quickly degenerates into a discussion of federalism. And, it's going to just get tougher as time goes on. I mean, like I said, I thought last spring a discussion of suing Amtrak was a little premature.
Does Metro North pay Amtrak to use the New Haven line from New Rochelle to New Haven and the Hudson line up to Poughkeepsie? Are any fees owed to Amtrak for the use of that?
This category of access fees is unknown to Metro North. Mike, help me out here if you can.
Metro North and MTA actually own the Hudson line, and we do not charge Amtrak access fees for operating over our line. As for the New Haven line, we own the New Haven line up to the New York-Connecticut state line, and the state of Connecticut owns it in the state of Connecticut, and neither we nor the state of Connecticut charge Amtrak access fees. I'm sure I'll be corrected by our legal department, but that's my understanding of the situation.
Okay.
On that issue, my recollection is that Congress passed a law relating to access fees between Amtrak and all the commuter railroads in the Northeast, or up and down the Northeast corridor, which is the point Jano made before about the issue of why certain access fees are charged. Certain of them were authorized by Congress.
Yeah, and there's the so-called PREA regime of operating and capital costs. That is the federally required,
Right.
federally specified financial relationship between the commuter railroads and Amtrak. This is a request in addition to that.
Right, I know, I understand that point, but there is a legal basis for some money going from one side to another side.
And-
It's not like Amtrak just made it up. There is a legal basis.
No, well, they are actually just making.
No,
it
and that I
up.
point,
Okay.
right. But there are other places
the
where.
Passenger Rail Infrastructure Improvement
Right.
Act
Yeah.
provides for a cost allocation methodology
Right.
for operations and capital improvements along the corridor.
Right.
So,
So-
what
By the way, not to be a stickler, this isn't, in strict terms, a request. It's more like a condition, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So between Amtrak's Northeast Regionals and Acella's, they're running four trains an hour, perhaps, over the Hellgate route, something like that, depending on the time of day. Has Penn Station Access thought about how many trains the New Haven line would run over the route?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Mike to take that, but let me just say this, and this is an important concession on our part, which is that we agreed that we would plan and design the new railroad for Metro North
Based on
Penn
their
Access
schedule.
based on a 35% increase in Amtrak service. So we have agreed to provide for a significant increase in Amtrak service and to provide and to pay for the infrastructure that permits that to happen as a baseline. But Mike, do you want to take the question of what the balance of service might be in a hypothetical service plan?
I think one of the things that's worth noting is what we've done is we've modeled for kind of the maximum level of service, which was up to 132 trains on weekdays. That being said, the expectation is generally a common level of service to what we currently provide to many of our commuter stations, which is 20-minute service on the peak and 30-minute service in the off-peak. That can be adjusted according to demand and a variety of other factors, and it's also a factor of availability of equipment and that kind of thing. So I think the bottom line is we are working closely with Amtrak and with our partners at Long Island as well to determine kind of how many slots, if you will be available. I think that the chief constraining factor isn't necessarily the line so much as the East River tunnels and Penn Station itself. And so the conversation becomes one of proportionality of, the proportion of trains going under the East River that have an MTA logo on it, whether they're red trains or yellow trains, they're MTA slots, if you will. And the expectation was that proportionality, the expectation on behalf of Amtrak was that proportionality would not change. And that's not something necessarily that we have an issue with so much as just being able to run the level of service that would accommodate our customers. But that gets into more complex conversations, obviously, about phasing, continuing construction projects under the East River, and of course the slots at Penn itself.
If I could, in your statement about the 35% increase, somebody's statement about the 35% increase, does that take into account the changes necessary at Penn Station itself to accommodate both that increase on Amtrak's part and whatever other changes Metro North and Long Island Railroad make in relation to our number of slots? I mean, I can understand why it's okay over the Hellgate Bridge, but nobody's stopping on the Hellgate Bridge. They're not stopping until they get to Penn Station. No, I understand that, but the point is not 35% over the Hellgate Bridge. the issue is 35% at Penn Station. If they go 35% over their current allotment at Penn Station, what happens to our slots?
So
Whether they're
one
Metro
of the,
North or Long
yeah,
Island.
So just to hopefully reassure you, our position, and Amtrak has accepted it,
Right.
is that there can be we can't lose our proportion of the overall slots.
Right.
So while, we can talk about whether there can be improvements that would allow more trains to operate in and out of Penn and more trains to operate on the Hellgate line, the proportion, we can't be robbed of our proportional
Right.
share of the slots. And that principle has been accepted.
Does that include whatever additions will happen as a part of Gateway?
No, that does not include Penn South or any of the other phasing of adding to Penn Station.
So
It would,
the-
it
it would-
probably,
Go ahead.
it requires them to use Penn Station differently.
Right.
The existing Penn Station differently.
Or a larger Penn Station, and whatever conglomeration you want to make it in that context. But that will not, the current Penn Station will not incorporate all of those issues. I think
Then
that's a
again,
fair
Mr.
statement.
Pally, Penn Access has more modest aims.
I understand that, but the point is, all of these things are happening together. They may not happen at the exact same time, but they will happen in some sequence. And at some point, the necessary infrastructure changes have to be made, and somebody has to pay for them to allow all of those things to happen.
And I think, just to follow on some of the work that Jano has already done, and I've assisted with some of the discussions with Amtrak, at this point, we're really talking about guiding principles, right? And so that's where the proportionality is the stake in the ground. Like, there are some things we don't know, and then there are some things we know.
Right.
And they seem to have agreed to that. The open issues that were previously raised about access fees, the Pelham Bay Bridge, I think those are questions that we felt should not be part of this equitable arrangement, particularly at this time.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
IEC report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not much to add to that discussion from our end. But from our point of view, we think the project team's focusing on the two things they need to do, the implementation arrangement with Amtrak and the environmental assessment, both of which are important to defining the job to get a start for preliminary design. And we also support and applaud the coordination of the GEC contract with the pending arrangement with Amtrak. We think that's a good strategy, and recognize the project for negotiating the contract and getting that under their belt. And we look forward to the arrangement with Amtrak and hopefully the award of the contract. Those are my remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As a reminder of the project, it's a 9.8 miles between Hicksville and Floral Park. In December, the board awarded the contract to Third Track Constructors as a single contract for design build. We have been working towards completing our planning at the end of next month, and I am happy to report that we had a groundbreaking this month and are ahead of our work on construction. Our aim for the last 9 months has been to do substantial planning for the project. Key to that has been the involvement of the 50 or so organizations that are outside of the MTA, the local authorities, and the utilities. I'm happy to report that they are all on board, and I think at this stage we have excellent relationships. We did meet with the combined group of the authorities having jurisdiction on Thursday last week at the suggestion of this board at the last meeting, and we had a very good working meeting. They have asked that instead of a 2-month interval for meetings, that we actually meet every month, and we've agreed to do that. I would also highlight over the last few months, we have been working with Third Track Constructors on a number of iterations on the schedule. We received what we think is the final draft of the baseline schedule this week, That is a good achievement to get before we start construction in detail. It has taught us a lot. Notably, it has taught us that we need to swap some of the scope from the base work to the completion work and vice versa for a no-cost change. To make sure we meet our deadline of the fourth quarter of 2022, we're going to come back to the board next month and show that we have done this no-cost swap of scope. And specifically, over the last 3 months, I go the wrong way, just a second. We've showed you this slide a number of times before. All the activities on the left are underway. On the right-hand side, we are working on all of those at the present time. I would like to just mention a couple. In particular, the walls that have been discussed, I think at the LIRR meeting this morning. We've learned from other projects that they take quite a bit of concentration. Our 3TC contractor folks have come up with some very ingenious and I would say innovative ways of building walls. They have special equipment that they're currently constructing and manufacturing to put on the track and to build the walls from the track. It's a lesson from 2nd Avenue. Thank you. These next 3 graphics show where we are on construction on site. Currently, if you were out there today, you would see a lot of tree trimming. You would see extensive utility work at Urban and Covert. We had the groundbreaking at Urban last week or the week before. If you were there today, you would see 3 or 4 teams for utilities as well as third track constructors working there. We've essentially reached heavy construction, we think, on that part of the work. Wi-Fi is now open at all 7 stations along the corridor. Looking ahead to the next year, we reported last time the activities that are happening off of the right-of-way. We're updating that sheet here. There are a total of 5 railroad bridges, 4 stations, 1 parking structure, and 2 undergrade crossings scheduled to be started in the next 12 months. We have highlighted Plainfield Avenue on the left there in a slightly different color, just to allow me to make the point that third track constructors have worked with Floral Park and realized that their plans for road closures would have actually severely affected the school kids. So they've worked to actually change the construction sequence to be out of the school year. And there's lots of examples of that going on daily on the project, which I would commend. If I could go back 1 slide, if that's possible. This slide, we haven't shown you before, but it represents the critical path of the project. It's actually the work that's going on within the 66 feet right-of-way on the 9.8 miles. The work in blue is by the contractors, third track constructors. The work in red is shared between third track constructors and force account. One of our major risks going forward is how those forces interact. One of our major risks going forward is can we meet the production targets that we've set as part of our schedule? We're working on all those risks actively at the present time. As a KPI for design and progress at the present time, we're offering the 90% design drawing schedule and what's called the RFC schedule, which is the ready for construction phase drawing. What we're seeing is our contractors are meeting the 90-day schedule very well. They're on track. We are seeing a little delay in the completion of the 100% drawings, the ready for construction package. We understand and have worked through the detail of this is associated with getting the surveys correct, getting the alignments fixed, and all of those have been extensive efforts over the last few months. I would also highlight that to get to the RFC, the contractors have to get approval from the local authorities having jurisdiction, and that sometimes is taking us a little while. We did receive some advice from the third track constructors recently that Nassau County were slightly slower behind in their approvals and their comments. We have since worked with Nassau County to give them additional resources so they're back on schedule. We show the graph on the left the last time as a surrogate for how we're managing our 600 commitments made in the MOUs before the project was awarded. We have since, on the right-hand side, broken that into a timeline of commitments so that we can essentially test ourselves in time. As of the 1st of September, we think we had met 151 of the 600 commitments. There was 175 we had actually projected to meet. As of this morning, we've met 166, I'm pleased to say. Pre-construction surveys and completion of the traffic work plans have yet to be completed, and we would hope we'd be slightly further on that. I think the more we're getting into the traffic work plans with the local authorities, the more we're learning and we're tweaking our plans as we go. More to come on that. We've had 150 meetings so far this year. We have initiated the bi-monthly meeting with the community leaders. As part of that meeting on Thursday, we also initiated a performance tracker of the authorities having jurisdiction. To my surprise, they all were very pleased with that, and they've asked us to issue that every week so they get a summary of their own performance. It's quite a commitment for them to meet the targets. Moving to risk mitigation, I won't go through all the lists. I will highlight the efficient use of track outages. Number 2 on the right there is something that we're focusing on right now. We do feel that there are lessons to be learned, that 3TC and ourselves need to work together slightly closer than we have been doing. We are seeing a need for improved quality of information to the passengers. We're seeing a little bit of a lack of focus on that right now, and we're working with Phil Eng and his staff to make sure we meet all the commitments there. And finally, on item 5, we are seeing a need for improvement in certain staff, both within the project management team and within third track constructors. We are not happy to just leave personnel in place if they don't prove they can actually meet the deadlines and meet the commitments that we've made. So we have asked for and are achieving some changes in staff, which you may hear about in detail in other places. I wouldn't want to go ahead to say that we're holding everybody else accountable without saying we're holding ourselves accountable. I won't go through this graph in detail, but it's a tracker of how we're meeting our commitments every week in responding to the third track constructors' submittals. We call this the fire chart because the further up the line you go, the more red it gets. And if you see red on any chart, it's a problem. We were required to respond to comments within 21 days. Our average is 14. We have received 1,100 submittals so far, of which 14 have passed beyond our contractual date of 21 days because they were surveys and they just took longer. We think our performance is good, and we're working out watching it very closely. 2 more slides. We haven't reported on finances to date. Having just received the final schedule, we now have a cost-loaded schedule this month. We will provide a little more detail in the next months. But as of the end of July, we had $210 million spent on the project. We're not sure you've seen the breakdown of that so far. We can talk about that in detail if necessary, but we just wanted to give you a little more information about that. It's slightly behind what we had expected in expenditure, but now that we've received a new schedule from our third track constructor folks, we expect to update that a little bit next month. Finally, it's a very brief outline of the schedule, and it's really there to make the point that we need to switch some scope from the completion scope to the base scope. We are in discussions with 3TC about that currently. We think the value of that change is about $50 million, but it's a net zero change. It's taking scope from one and bringing it to the other. We've seen in detail over the last couple of months that to meet our schedule in 2022, we need to bring some scope forward. There may be other things of this nature that we bring to the board. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions of Mark before we go on to the IC? Yes.
On the last page, the schedule summary.
Yeah.
It says parking garage.
Yes.
Is there a reason there's no S after garage?
My mistake, garages, thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Did you get that comment from Andrew?
I know the community's involved.
Oh, correct.
And they are all anticipating that work. So
I'll change that.
I just wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in translation somewhere. Thank you. You're doing an excellent job, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
Obviously, I hear from a lot of people in Nassau County. Since Nassau County does not have a representative at the moment, I become both. I hear from them a lot and the villages, and they have nothing but tremendous praise for you and your staff. And I say to them, it's only September of 2018.
Yes.
We hope it will continue as we go forward, but I'm sure it will. And as a traveler on the main line, I see the work being done. It's amazing how quickly, when you go 1 week and then you go the next week, how much additional clearing and work that's being done along the right-of-way.
It's a good team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions?
So just the bottom line, I just want to be clear. Sure. We are at this moment on time and on budget.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Mohammed?
Good afternoon. The IEC participated in a quarterly risk workshop reviewing design, external project management, and construction risks. The top near-term project risks are as follows: timely approval of a cost-loaded integrated project schedule, including construction staging, effective use of track outages, and interface between the design-build contractor and Long Island Railroad force account services. The IEC has observed that the project management team is making every effort to mitigate these near-term project risks. Finally, the IEC acknowledges that the project management team and the design-build contractor have performed significant amount of upfront work, including utility agreements, property acquisitions, and setting up of the project headquarters in Westbury, Long Island, which positions them well for the start of heavy construction in the fourth quarter of 2018. This concludes the IEC's comments on the Long Island Railroad expansion project.
Thank you, Mohammed. Any questions from members? There being none, moving forward, it's now at 4:15. The capital program status report, Ronnie Hickam.
Thank you. I will condense to simply say that the commitment performance summary is listed at page 72 of the materials, and the completion performance summary is listed on page 75 of the materials.
Okay. Don, the quarterly traffic light reports.
Okay, before I get to that, I just want to introduce Tom Savio, who's sitting to my right as a new director of the Office of Construction Oversight. Tom's been with the MTA for more than 20 years at 3 different agencies, and I know he'll be a great asset to all of us as we move forward with this current program and future capital programs. Like Ronnie, I will condense the traffic light report. The core program report begins on page 81. It lists projects by green, yellow, and red. 33 are designated as red, and there are details behind that the agencies put together in the book. And similarly for the traffic program, it starts on page 120. There are 10 designated as red out of 82 projects, and there are details behind those as well. And there's also in the book, as there was the same report that was in the Finance Committee, a quarterly capital change report on page 138 for your information.
Great. Are there any questions? Is there any new business? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Seconded. Thank you.